On a recent building project, I needed to decide whether I was going to use nails or screws for the framing that I needed to build for this wall. The right choice was to use nails, especially since I have a nail gun. However, I was reminded of the importance of not only selecting the right solution to a problem, but also remaining aware and careful while implementing that right choice. Because while I was shooting a nail for the top portion of a wall, the nail angled a bit more than I expected, hit a knot that I had not seen inside the wood, blew out at the edge of the board I was nailing, and ended up skimming across the back of my hand, cutting a rather deep cut in it. And that concept of being aware and careful and not just selecting the right solution to a problem is highlighted in this week's question. Just because the right approach is selected, in this case, the case of this question, a plugin, it doesn't mean we can afford to take shortcuts on the implementation, or we'll wind up shooting ourselves in the foot. Let's review the question for this week. You're working on a Magento 2 project with a custom GraphQL-based frontend. During the checkout process, it's necessary to have some additional logic that happens when the quantity changes or updates are made on the cart page. A plugin was added on the quote class save function for that purpose. But during testing, you notice that the plugin also runs during the shipping and payment steps, causing unintended side effects. And so the question is, what is the best way to ensure that the plugin doesn't get triggered on those additional steps? And so we have these three options. Option A, switch the plugin to Magento quote GraphQL model resolver UpdateCartItems, that class. Or we can, for option B, add conditions to the quote plugin to check for the specific scenarios when the logic needs to happen. And finally, C, we can check the URL pattern in the plugin so that the plugin only runs if it is not /shipping or /payment, those paths. So again, the right approach has been selected. We're using a plugin to make some changes when products in the cart are updated. However, there is a problem with that implementation. Again, the plugin getting triggered more than expected. Now, going through the different options, option A looks good. If there is a class that specifically deals with cart item updates, that is going to be more specific to our use case than something generic or more generic like the quote save function, which is going to keep that plugin from running unexpectedly. But continuing on through the list of options, B would work. We could definitely make this work. We can use the debugger to step through. We can figure out the different scenarios that plugin is getting triggered on, and we can basically lock down that plugin to where it is only going to get triggered in the specific scenarios that we actually intend for it to be triggered on. However, that may not be the best approach when you consider the additional code that's going to need to be written, possibly the creation of bugs along that route, the need for more testing. Maybe that would be more of a time-consuming approach. Now, option C, we could check the URL path, see if it's shipping or payment, and make sure that it's not running if it is that path. Now, again, that's going to be grabbing some data, adding conditions into that situation, that plugin. And so, again, it may not be the best idea. We have to be careful of edge cases that we may not have thought of. And that was actually ended up being the case on a project I was recently working on. I needed to make some updates to the specific plugin. And while I had thought of several of the different use cases and had confirmed that those use cases were a problem, there were edge cases. There were things that ended up getting caught later on by our QA team, and ended up just being a very time-consuming approach. And time could have been saved if, from the get-go, the correct class or correct function had been selected for that plugin if maybe some more thought and time and research had gone into setting all of that up. So option C looks like it might not be the best option either. Again, you've got the level of code complexity as well, and that can really play a large part when we are developing this kind of functionality. We want to make sure that our code can be easily read, easily understood. A few months from now, when we forget why we wrote what we wrote and what it's supposed to do. So, going back to option A, we can actually take a look at the UpdateCartItems class. I have that pulled up in my PHP Storm. And so we have the class here. And we have this resolve function, which actually looks like it's going to be the perfect spot for us to drop that plugin. We can switch it from being on the quote save function to here for UpdateCartItems. This is specifically built out in the Magento core GraphQL module for the quote to handle those cart item updates, which is, again, our specific use case based on this question. And so if we use this resolve function for our plugin, that is going to take care of the extra scenarios that quote save is throwing our way. And this is just a nifty little class that's not going to be triggered every time that quote is saved. Now on the flip side of this, there is no really comparative class in core Magento. So if we're doing an implementation of something like this, and we're not using a GraphQL implementation, it's not going to be quite so simple. It's going to be a bit more of a pain. But here in this case, we are using a GraphQL implementation, and it's pretty cool. There are some very concise plugin points that make updates like this, additional functionality like this, quite easy to set up. And this is why I mentioned highlighting being careful and aware as we build the functionality that we work through. We can again select the right approach to resolving a problem, but if we're not careful, if we don't make sure that we have our bases covered, we can miss something simple like a class that does exactly what we need to have happen. In this case, UpdateCartItems, a class that is going to be the perfect situation for our plugin, and the reason that option A is selected as our correct answer. We're going to want to switch that plugin to the UpdateCartItems class on that resolve function. That's going to be a more specific class. It's going to keep that plugin from running those excessive times, and it's going to take care of the problems that we are experiencing. Now, if you'd like to learn more about GraphQL, we actually have a course on swiftouter.com. It goes over a lot of the different aspects that you'll need to know to be able to use GraphQL efficiently and develop with it. And so head on over to swiftouter.com to check that out. Thanks for watching.